This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wylie.
And I'm Peter Sir.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. Well, hope you've all had a very happy Christmas. We've had many episodes of Books for Breakfast in 2024, and we really enjoyed meeting all the poets and writers. But Peter and I couldn't resist closing this year without one more podcast for 2024 before the New Year bells start ringing in. So on today's programme, we're going to treat you to some highlights of this year's podcast, and we hope that you really enjoy it. At the end of the year, of course, we often think of those people we have lost, and we were very saddened this year to hear of the death of poet, critic, essayist, academic Gerald Daw, and also of the death of Fred Johnston, both very fine poets and writers very much missed, and also of Merrily Harper. This year on Books for Breakfast, we did an episode down at Strokestown Poetry Festival, and we really enjoyed being there. Merrily Harper was known as a cartoonist, an author, but also as founder of Strokestown Poetry Festival, a festival which is still very much alive. In the 1990s, she moved to a cottage on the side of Slieve Bawn at Strokestown, and she is also the sister of James Harper, the poet, so she will be very much missed as well.
And of course, we also think of Judith Mock, who died just before Christmas. Judith was, of course, a singer, a poet and novelist, and a memoirist whose Holocaust memoir, The State of Dark, was published in 2022 by Lilliput Press. And indeed, we talked to Judith on this podcast about that book when it came out. And our sympathies go to her family, her husband Michael Agustin and daughter Sarah.
But we're going to move on today now because we have a very active programme. We have highlights of the year 2024 from Books for Breakfast. And Peter, you also want to talk about what else will be on the programme.
Yes, and it's always very sad to hear of the passing of people like that. And at least we can say that 2024 was also the year when we got to celebrate the 80th birthday of poet Paul Durcan. And there was a great event in the Gate Theatre to celebrate that, and the publication of an anthology, 80 at 80, edited by Niall McMonagle and published by Harville Secker.
Yeah, really fine anthology. What a unique voice. What an amazing performer of poetry. And Peter, it was really wonderful to attend that Gate event and see poets like Paula Meehan, Theo Dorgan and the President of Ireland, all of them reading their favourite choices of poems by Paul Durcan. So this anthology, we hugely recommend it. 80 at 80, published by Harville Secker, a huge celebration of the poet Paul Durcan, who must, I have to say, never be forgotten. What a poet.
Okay, well, we're going to start off today by talking to poet Keith Payne about two books he was involved with this year. His own new book, Building the Boat, and his translations of the Galician poet Luisa Castro. Joining us today at the breakfast table is poet and translator Keith Payne. Keith is the author of 9 collections of both poetry in translation and original poetry. Keith also curates the A Rua O'Donnell Poetry Exchange, Ireland, Galicia, and he lives in Vigo in Spain with his wife Sugurido Pombo and child Theo. So today it's all going to be about boats and seafaring as we talk to Keith about Whales and Whales, the first English translation by Keith of Luisa Castro, one of the most celebrated voices in contemporary Galician poetry, and currently director of the Cervantes Institute in Dublin. She's been there since 2022.
But we'll start off by turning to Building the Boat, which is here on the table, the breakfast table beside us, written by Keith Payne himself, produced by Badly Made Books in 2023. I have to say, Keith, I thought that the title of the publishers was a bit ironic because it's the most beautifully produced book. And it's a poem about the building of a boat. It's split into 3 parts. At Dunfanaghy Curragh, to be exact, in Mehalmara Boatyard in Cork, from January to May 2023. I'd love to have been there, Keith, to have observed all that. Must have been amazing. But Keith, I know you were granted the Eco Poet residence by Cork City Libraries in 2023. And I was wondering, was it this support that gave you the impetus to start this boat building, boat poem project?
That was exactly it. And good morning, Peter, and good morning, Enda. Great to be here at the breakfast table with you and enjoying your very aromatic coffees. This was exactly it. I had done a number of residencies and found that by the end, you've kind of given yourself away. You've taught and you've lectured and you've mentored, and you look back 3 or 6 months later and realize I've not written much. So I set myself the goal of going into the boatyard, working on a build, and responding to it with a long poem or a chapbook length poem. And as you probably both know, when you get commissions, it's a tricky and nervous thing to do. You say to yourself, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to volunteer and I will produce a long poem. But in this case, the poem really just built itself. We had 16 weeks every Wednesday in the boatyard down in Crosses Green for 2 hours every Wednesday of building the boat with a group of young men and women from the National Learning Network. And then straight away, I'd go to the cafe on Oliver Plunkett Street, Cafe Nero, and write up all my notes. And then from there, once I went back to Vigo and started researching the history of curraghs, the tradition of curraghs, the appearance of curraghs in literature, in the ancient Irish texts, really the boat book almost wrote itself.
And I love the way, it starts in Cork and then you go back to Vigo. But when I was reading it, I felt there was a real boat builder's heft to the language used. You say, and with a transom of straight and cross-grained silver fir or archangel spruce, mark and bore the mortise holes that will hold the bone-white ribs, then chisel from the soft wood a halving joint to set the transom in. Oh my gosh, the language of the boat being built, it really comes alive and it becomes almost a character, I think, in this long poem. You say things like this: chamfered cleats, a bowsaw, a billhook, the click and clunk of thole, for instance. Very early in the morning to be saying all that, Keith, but it's amazing. It's amazing. So did you have to carefully research the language of building a boat, the names of the instruments used, the different varieties of woods?
Well, to be honest, that came from two sources to begin with. The first was in the boatyard with the head boat builder, Seamus O'Brien. And he would just mention, okay, this is a bowsaw, and this is a billhook, and this is a draw knife, and this is the thole, and this is the transom, and that's the knee of the boat. And then anything I didn't know, I would ask him. And then at the same time, I joined Naomh Corchaí, who are a boat rowing club based on the Shannon, who would row out at this time of the morning. Right now, they'd be rowing down to Blackpool and heading out, wide awake, having had their coffee long ago. And so I joined the rowing club, and going out with them every week, you would pick up language and you'd learn new names. So that language, I think, in almost any specialist area, especially if it's something to do with making, it has its own toolbox of language, really, doesn't it? That's just so rich and etymologically such fun and so reflective.
Yeah, and it's great to be out there in the boat and hearing it from the experts themselves, and also how inspiring to be on the water like that. But the traditional skin boat has been crossing waters for centuries, as you said earlier. There's an Irish tradition moving across and beyond history. I'm thinking of St. Brendan in the 6th century, sailing in his kirk, wasn't it, from Kerry to Newfoundland, I think 1,000 years before Columbus. And it was something, wasn't Tim Severin, didn't he try to replicate that and prove, did St. Brendan make it to North America? But I suppose going back and researching all that as well, it must have been so inspiring, was it, Keith?
It is, and I reread Tim Severin, the Brendan voyage, while I was making the boat and writing this book, and frightened once again when they're up in those Icelandic ice fields with about a quarter of an inch between them and dizzying depth of freezing Atlantic. I have a feeling, Enda, that when you see those curraghs beetling across the water towards you, it's implanted in our visual DNA. We've been seeing these boats for thousands of years, either coming ashore with stores or maybe with attack, or leaving as well. And I think that they really are. If we could show such a thing as a visual DNA, I think we'd find that black beetling curragh implanted firmly there.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember as a child being up in Carrickfinn in Donegal, and we'd go down with our mothers in the evening at time. All the children would be out there, and we'd see the as you were saying, the black beetles coming in, and we'd actually get fish from them, and then we'd cook them that evening. But as a child, it was so visual to actually see that. But there is, I think, as well, a transformative power to the whole process of building a boat, isn't there? You say the tools we use, we trust. The tools we use for making us. So it's kind of transforming you, isn't it, as a human?
It is. I mean, the boatyard of Mehel Mara, and that idea of a Mehel, of working together, was set up by Pádraig Deneen, who was a chief engineer and a passionate boat builder. And he set it up for young lads coming off Spike Island at the time, back in the 80s, you'll remember. And he just knew inherently that if you get to build something with your hands and see it become in front of your eyes, that will transform you. And he's absolutely right. And it is a transformative experience, I think, to build anything, whether it be a garden or a poem.
Well, you did both, Keith, so well done. You built a boat and a poem from it. But you say, this is a boat you cannot build alone. Rings out with every hammer tap, every slide of the plane, every draw on the saw in the boatyard in Crosses Green that is Mehel Mara. So the men, the women, the crew, they're characters in this book as well, aren't they? And they're celebrated, and they welcomed you into the boat building group. Were they happy to have a poet on board? It must have been amazing for them as well to have somebody there who's embracing it so much, but in a language way.
I think they were amused to begin with, as most groups are when a poet approaches them. And well, two things. Firstly, in the Naval Corchi rowing group, nobody asks what you do. You're a rower, and you're either the stroke at the front, or you're the captain at the back, or the engine in the middle, and that's kind of the extent of your identity. In the boatyard, again, pretty soon it's hands-on tools, and everyone's working in a rhythm, and it is really a mehel. And that's one of the opening phrases that you'll hear from Seamus when you go there, is that you can't build this boat alone. So you need the mehel to do it, and you need to work together, and everyone is kind of falling into a collective rhythm, and it's a wonderful thing to be part of.
Oh, it's absolutely lovely. Well, our own daughter just woke up this morning very early, 6 a.m. I was out rowing as well up in Island Bridge. So
oh, well done.
It's a beautiful thing to watch as well. I think it's so beautiful to watch it. But Keith, you know what? We'd love to hear you read a piece from it now. I think you're going to read a piece about very cold days when you're working the plane. Isn't that right?
That's right, because it's a very cold boatyard. It's hard by the River Lee. It's in a crook in the river, or a knee in the river, with concrete and stone floors. So it gets pretty cold there, and you're happy to get a go on the plane to work your body a bit. So I'll read a section from the first part. On cold days you work the plane slantwise, 1/8 inch at a time, thinking esplanade, pianoforte, feldspar, open fields, flat as the palm of your open hand. You can't resist gliding over and back across the smooth arboreal plain. A simple offering to the gods of Sheffield, Stanley, Faithful and McCabe. The tools we use, we trust. The tools we use for making us. And in, and in, and in. They say you use your core to pull and not your back. You let the craft do all the work and lift you clean across the sea. And in, and in, and in. I feel the blades dip in time and pull clearly back across the cleat to next in line an hour four-hander. The click and clunk of thole and dip and back and swift along the river's top. A seabird that holds no grip but dances on the open seas and turns to face the waves when waves they break. And in, and in, and in, and yes, you do. You use your core to pull and not your back, and you're riding atop the waves.
Oh, thanks, Keith. That was so mesmeric. I think there's a great kind of rhythmic quality to that piece with the repetition of and in and in and in. And recently, Peter and myself witnessed a performance of this poem at the Bear Island Arts Festival in September. It was a perfect place, I have to say, to perform your poem, surrounded as we were by the sea, and we were watching you and the dancer Inma Pavon perform with musician Mick O'Shea. We were in the drill hall on the island. You started off in Cork and then you wrote the text for this book back in Vigo. Is it a city that inspires you, that keeps you motivated as a writer?
I tend to spend the winters there, and I'm kind of bilocational. I'm here 6 months, I'm there 6 months. So what Vigo offers me is quiet. I can work. I miss the great scene and all my friends here, but that forces me up to the room to work and work quietly. There's a lot less distraction. It's cheaper to live, so it gives me that quietude. And yeah, at the moment, I'm writing actually about Vigo, starting to, because I want my relationship with it to deepen, and I find the best way to do that is write about it. So at the moment, I'm pounding the pavement every morning, walking, just to see what strikes me and to try and see through some of the layers of the city.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I mean, Peter Serra here in this house, he did the same thing with Intimate City, his collection of essays. So Walking City sounds brilliant. And 6 months in Vigo, 6 months in Ireland. Peter, we're living the wrong life. We need a life like that. But while you're here, Keith, I've said earlier that you run the A. Rua O'Donnell Poetry Exchange between Ireland and Galicia. Could you just tell listeners and poets who are interested in applying a little bit about that?
Absolutely, Enda. The A. Rua O'Donnell Poetry Exchange, we've just completed our third year with Irish poet Dylan Brennan going to Galicia for a month, and Galician poet Isaac Shubin spending a month in Tyrone Guthrie Centre and Carrig. It essentially came out of the realisation that per square metre, I think Galicia may match Ireland with poets per square metre. There's a similar standing army, as Kavanagh called us, over there. And it seemed to me obvious that we need to be in conversation with one another. So I set up this exchange, which is supported by Poetry Ireland, the Tyrone Guthrie Centre and Literature Ireland. And it's essentially the month of September, an Irish poet is funded to go to Galicia to write for a month, is translated into Galician and Spanish, and a Galician poet comes to the Tyrone Guthrie Centre and Carrig. The call out will be coming around March, April of next year, hopefully, and it's for any Irish poet or poet living in Ireland who has at least one collection published.
Right, sounds amazing. Well, Keith, thanks so much for talking to us about building the boat. And anyone listening out there, I really think you should read this. And I love also the quote at the beginning where you say, "Why do so many people in Cork think they walk on water? I suppose it's because they do." So well done, Keith. So Peter, over to you next. I know you've loads of questions to ask Keith.
Again, sticking, I mean, it's very much kind of going from boats to whales, because you've been busy this year, Keith, and one of the things you've done is to publish a book of translations from a book of poems by the Galician poet Luisa Castro, and it's Whales and Whales, which came out from Skeen Press in 2024, and it's very much, I mean, I found it a very interesting kind of lively collection, and it's very much, you know, we have the sea in it again. There's kind of like a young woman. There's, you know, her father kind of working away fishing in the Atlantic. There's her mother working in a canning factory. But it's much more than that. There's all, you know, there's kind of mad sort of dreams and journeyings and crazy nuns, and you know, it's kind of like a girl turning into a woman, and it's like a whole lot of things together. But maybe just to start, I mean, tell us a little bit about, you know, who is Luisa Castro, first of all.
So Luisa Castro is a renowned Galician poet and novelist. She is currently the director of Cervantes in Dublin. She has just completed her first year there. There are 4 more years. She's very active culturally. They've just had the Isla Festival, Ireland, Spain, Latin America. And we're in the works of creating an Ireland Galicia Festival for next spring. Luisa wrote this book. It was her second collection, Peter, Baleias y Baleias, Whales and Whales. She wrote it when she was only 19, between 19 and 20. On an Olivetti Letrera white typewriter in a small flat on Rua San Francisco in Santiago de Compostela, just down the side from the cathedral. And as she said to me herself, it just came in this outburst, this rush. Louisa had grown up on the coast. Her father was a fisherman. He would go to work on a Monday morning and come back maybe 2 months later. He fished all around the Irish coast. He knew Crosshaven, he knew Dingle, he knew St Kilda in Scotland, he knew the Grand Saul or the Great North Atlantic. And this book is, in a way, it's like you said, it's a young wildling, is what I call her, becoming a young woman, awakening sexually, awakening to literature, awakening to the power of poetry, and in fact, becoming a poet. By the time we reach the end of the collection, she has given her first reading and is now on the scene.
It's extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading from in your very interesting introduction, and she says 30 years have passed since the writing of this collection. I remember very well the image that gave rise to it. My father and myself one afternoon, stranded like sperm whales in the old morass factory, looking out to the sea from under the rusted frames. I was obsessed with finding the last of the whaling stations and so on. But it's really kind of like the only thing it reminds me of in that kind of burst of energy and the wildness of the kind of this kind of surging, intense imagination. It's very much like it reads like a very kind of a Galician Nuala ní Dhomhnaill. Does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely. And in fact, when I was thinking of an equivalent to Louisa, Nuala ní Dhomhnaill came straight to mind. And I talked to friends about this and they all agreed. Here was a young female poet in her late teens, early 20s, writing in a minoritized language, who just appeared on the scene. So Louisa just burst onto the scene in Madrid, broke all the rules, disregarded completely the proprieties, the imposed proprieties of, let's say it, old male poetry scene. So very much like Nuala. And I mean, I'm rereading at the moment, Peter, The 50-Minute Mermaid, just this week, just to try and get a deepening sense of it. And yes, that use of myth, and I suppose that filtering of her surroundings through a young girl's mind and experience, almost like a ventriloquism, is similar to what Nuala does.
There's kind of a lot of atmosphere of kind of oppression and, you know, kind of schools and nuns and all that. And you get a sense of maybe the contrast between that kind of, that's what then it's the authoritarian kind of Franco's sort of Spain, and then this great loosening that happens, and that's reflected in the arts kind of afterwards. Is that part of the kind of story being told, that kind of contrast between different Spains?
I think it is. I think primarily, though, it's a contrast between different classes. It's between notions, bucolic notions of the fishing life on the coast and the wind in your hair versus the reality of working months and months away at sea, being smacked about by storms. So that hard-working life, and then, as you say, being a young girl under the oppression of the nuns. And the images that she uses, as you know, are the lions also throughout this, and the Romans with their whips. So while she's living through this oppressive regime, she's, as I think we all were, remember at Easter, Christmas, watching the Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur and all those Roman gladiatorial Christian films. And so she's finding quick, easy-to-hand metaphors for this oppression. So it's a breaking out of all those constricting norms that she's growing up in.
Maybe it's time we heard some of the poem. I know there's a section that you're intending to read for us, so maybe you could do that, Keith, and we could just get a sense of what the poem is like.
The book is in 4 sections. The first dealing with the protagonist's father as a fisherman, and then we go into the belly of the whale, which is the wildling's experience, growing up on the coast, being tribal, being sent away to the nuns. And then we have this section, which is 7 poems about lions. So I'll read the first poem, which goes, it's a longish poem, but I'll read it away. It's part 1. I divide the world in 2. You don't need to be old to understand it. On one side is my head. On the other, my dad chasing swordfish down the Irish coast in the frozen waters, where my grandfathers had lovers, children they confused with the names on bottles. My head is pure intelligence. My dad's a lion tamer. My head fits inside the lion's mouth. It's scary growing up in the lion's mouth. Every night we feed the lions. I fall into bed exhausted, Sylvia, all day feeding lions. My dad roars and I'm frightened all day. I work all day and I'm frightened of the lions. Frightened. I fall into bed with a leg missing, but I think about the one that's left and the lions. The law of the jungle is cruel. I work all day and the Romans have such frightening whips. My dad went after the swordfish just so I could, it scared me, feed the lions with my beautiful head. I could never get to sleep without some yawning lion waking me up. Since my body is so sweet, the lions prefer me. They devour with their eyes and their teeth. And the Romans have such frightening whips. I think as I go along, hopping on one foot, the one I've got left. I'm happy because I'm smart. I go to bed and quick as you like, I'm up. Lions are hungry. I close my eyes and let them tear at my last remaining leg. The lions are fat, but they're still hungry. Ha! What a pansy. Lions have the brains of a fly, but me, I'm clever. And the Romans have such frightening whips. I make do without my legs. This lion just devoured my last one. Ha! What a pansy. Brains of a fly. Who's going to take me? Who's going to make me work now? Sure, I've no legs to go and feed the lions. I fall into bed, exhausted from the waist up. From the waist down, pure intelligence. My dad's children are rum, beer, and swordfish. Me? I'm my father's daughter, the lion tamer. I'd like to see those imperial soap faces. They never held me. I placed all my intelligence down in the lion's belly, and he wasn't afraid. In my left ear I wear an earring, a gift from a colourful lover. One day my grandfather said to me, "You'll wear this earring as long as Interpol are patrolling Irish waters. You'll sail the high seas as long as your father's lips taste of contraband." I divide the world in two. From the waist up, pure intelligence. From the waist down, I love lions. I divide the world in two. My dad's hands are claws, and he lives in a house with no oars. The rest of my days, I'll feast on stinking lion flesh. I won't go hungry. My ear tastes of swordfish.
That's great. Thanks, guys. I think that gives a really good sense of the kind of almost like surreal energy of it, and the way, and again, I love the way that's followed by the poem looking at the mother. My mother works in a canning factory. One day, my mother said to me, "Love is a can of sardines. Do you know how they prep the sardines for the cans and so on?" And so it goes off on that journey again. And just to say that again, it's called Whales and Whales, and it is published by Skeen Press. I mean, how much we rely on kind of adventurous publishers like these, like the Badly Made Books or Skeen Press. I mean, we're greatly enriched by their presence, I think.
So that was Peter there talking to Keith Payne about Whales and Whales, translations by Luisa Castro, published by Skeen Press this year. So thank you so much, Keith, for coming to the breakfast table. We can go off now and have some coffee and have more chats.
Yeah, definitely time for some more coffee as we sit back and enjoy some of the highlights of this year's Books for Breakfast.
I wonder what we have up first, Peter. I'm looking forward to hearing these highlights.
Well, you remember one of the first podcast we did at the beginning of this year was we attended an event in Books Upstairs, which was to commemorate the kind of life and times you like and writings of Philip Casey.
Oh, I remember that. That was a really vibrant event. I remember talking to poet Katie Donovan. I remember talking to Dermot Bolger. And it was really wonderful to remember the force that was Philip Casey, the kindness of him, the passion of him, great lover of poetry, great lover of poetry, and also a huge encourager of younger poets.
So I thought we'd start actually with a poem that was sent to us by Michael Agustin, and it's kind of a memory of Philip.
Memorial Service, Mount Jerome. Your crutches, Philip, displayed in front of all of us gathered here. Your crutches, Philip, daffodil yellow, blue cuffs and grips, blackish brown rubberized feet. Your crutches, Philip, unable to walk the streets of Dublin without you.
And Enda, you mentioned Dermot, and here's a clip of Dermot Bolger talking about Philip at that event.
I first actually shook hands with Philip at the Vibrant Arts Festival in Galway in 1978, and it's only now, 46 years later, that some small semblance of feeling is returning to my crushed fingers. Because when you shook hands with Philip, your hands stayed shook. His handshake was as unforgettable as his laughter, as unforgettable as his infectious warmth, his hospitality, his generosity of spirit, his razor-sharp metropolitan intellectual curiosity about politics and social matters, his human interest in how you were, and his deflection of talk away from how he or his own pain in later years, the only hint of which was often in the lines on his face. Philip was the greatest of friends, the greatest of listeners, a man whose presence you never left without feeling buoyed by his warmth and grace, without walking away feeling taller and renewed because you had been blessed by the benediction and sacrament of his friendship. Very often in these pages we refer to the same things about Philip. His unique laugh gets mentioned 78 times.
You counted.
I did, yeah. I walked from my bag of tato. His generosity is mentioned 13 times, and his gift for friendship 29 times. But what gets mentioned most is what he tried to cover up most. The pain he endured is mentioned 95 times, and the way in which he tried to hide it is captured so well, notably in Helena McKern's description of him quietly arriving at a reading early that involved climbing up steep flights of stairs, which he did quietly before anyone else arrived, and saw the effort that this took out of him. Philip was a citizen of everywhere and a true poet of everywhere. While his novels are superb, for me, he primarily remembered as a poet, and it's great to see his poems getting such critical attention here.
Oh, Peter, wasn't that wonderful to hear the force and energy of Dermot Bolger there talking about much missed poet Philip Casey, the benediction of his friendship. Wonderful description. And from books upstairs to another brilliant bookshop in Dublin, Hodges Figgis, we went this year to talk to Kerry Hardie, whose brand new collection of poetry is called We Go On. Here's Kerry Hardie.
As you get older, you think, well, I always had the illusion that I would know what I was doing. That some time would come when this wonderful thing happened and I actually understood what was next and what I should be doing and all the rest of it. And then suddenly I realised that it wasn't going to happen. And so all I could do was, this echoes the We Go On title, all I could do was keep my feet on the ground. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, Deirdre Brennan, and she was talking about, and Moya Cannon also notices this, that Western Christian art, the angels don't have feet. They have loads and loads of linen cloth around their feet. So I realised that we have to grow feet and put them on the ground and walk on them. Interestingly, Byzantine art does have feet. So, and I don't think they have gender to their angels. I don't know if that's regressive or progressive, but we don't either.
That's a very interesting point. So you're going to read, it's actually the last line, isn't it, in that poem
Yes.
that refers back to that idea
Yes.
of the angels not having feet, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
You don't live up there, you live down here.
okay, I hope I'm not spoiling it from the listeners now, but if you want to read it first, Kerry, we'd love to hear it.
The ground under my feet. The morning light lies on hummocky fields early ploughing. On the stretch of the slope, a new lamb rises, staggers. I need to cross over into some place where no one expects me to know what I'm doing. Some place where I'm not even trying to understand or explain why light matters and ploughing, ordinary earthy things, the need to paint feet onto angels.
And next up, we interviewed Aoife Lyall about her second collection, also published by Blood Axe, called The Day Before. And Aoife treated us to a beautiful poem called Knuckles.
Yes, so this was a poem that I didn't think to write until my daughter I was getting my daughter ready for school. And it's that very specific memory of my mother bunching up my tights so I could get them on when I went to school. So even though I had done it for her for years before that, it was that very specific circumstance that brought the poem into being. Knuckles. As accurate and imprecise as a month of ligaments, I cast my mother's knuckles in bronze, used them to bunch the legs of capricious tights and socks, to hold a halo of fabric around my daughter's feet, stretch them to her chest, her chin, tendons designed to test the toes of shoes, the waistbands of jeans. When in doubt, I knead them into the ruined skin of my hollow chest. Hold up the mirror. Read.
And onwards to a very different kind of domesticity. Here's a poem called Ram from Victoria Kennefick's collection Eggshell, which was published this year by Carcanet.
Ram. It's on the kitchen table, the ram's skull. He came in cradling it in his arms. "Don't worry, it's been dead for ages," he whispered, then touched my cheek, a circuit forming between him, me, and the ram that flooded my body with crackling winter fire. He plonked the skull down before vanishing, as he does, into his head, and left this head, still on the wood, just bone and horns. And oh, what horns! I imagine his admirer's eyes, dark slits expanding to take them all in, the curve of them, looping, intentional things, rigid, strong. I can't look for long, can't reach out to touch them, though it's all I want to do. To be honest, I am scared of the narrow, brittle skull between two magnificent cornets, a sliver of bone, and in its empty sockets, a black blankness. It is the devil, no doubt, here on our kitchen table like a vase. It vibrates. I can almost hear its ancient bleats every time I make tea, load the dishwasher, stack plates. It is there. Weird exhibit. "I'll take it to show her," he says when he returns, meaning our 2-year-old who has been asking about bones, can smell death in the house. She runs in, her teething cheeks hot and red. "Mama, the baba doesn't need its head anymore." The 3 of us and the ram. Its presence a whisper from the future, stubborn, yes, and unapologetic. It's on the table, even now. Tomorrow it will disappear to his laboratory, but tonight I can't stop thinking about those hollow orbs. The thin fragments of skull clinging together to give shape to an idea. Ram, silhouetted against all the objects, against all the light. Ram, who am I supposed to be in all this? The floral blinds, the recipe books, the porcelain floor tiles. Oh, Ram, let us bash our heads off them and weep.
And from a ram to the life of animals, an obsession which is very prominent in Mary Costello's new collection called Barcelona, which came out this year from Canongate. So we invited Mary to our breakfast table, and it was a pleasure to speak to her.
I think that writers, well, I can't speak for other writers, but I guess I write what obsesses me. I write what consumes me, and I write only what I have to. You know, it has to be essential. I wouldn't write if I didn't have to be honest. There are a few things over my life that have really got to me, and one of them is the lives of animals, the suffering lives of animals, the lives of the weak in general, but in particular the lives of animals, because it's the suffering of animals is so accepted. We all accept it. I'm culpable. I wear leather shoes sometimes, and I remember reading Milan Kundera said the real test of humanity is our obligations towards the weak. It's a question of mercy, really, how we treat the weak in society. and what mercy we have for those who are voiceless and defenseless. And of course, it's obvious we have that regard for elderly people, for children, for disabled, for minorities, for anybody who has no voice. But the group that has completely no voice are those who cannot speak, animals. And I grew up on a farm, a beef farm. And I became a vegetarian in my 20s, and I ate a lot of meat up until then, I can tell you. But I always had to reconcile that conflict within me, because I benefited from the lives of animals. I was reared and educated on them. So, and my father was a very good man. He's passed away now, and he was a loving father and a kind, considerate man who practiced very good animal welfare. He was a very progressive farmer. So I cannot say, and we had very many robust conversations, and he actually used to feel great concern for me, because I went through a few very intense years of torture, especially in my 30s, when I saw animal suffering everywhere. I'd drive up and down to Galway from Dublin, and livestock trucks would pass, or I'd see cattle or horses in a field, and I would see circuses parked up outside towns in the times when they would have animals in big containers and everywhere. And I can say that it really disturbed me, and I probably was in a bad place for a good while. And so I would rant at home to my father, and he would be very concerned, and he'd say, Mary, why are you putting yourself through this? And, so I couldn't blame him personally, because we're all culpable. Society decides to utilize animals. Society uses it in every single way. So it eventually leaked into my work. I couldn't really face it head on, but the earlier stories would have some of them. In the first collection, there is a story called You Fill Up My Senses, named after the John Denver song, and the little girl is aware of the lambs being castrated. But in this one, as I got older, I didn't police myself in any way, but I managed to, it just seeped in a lot more overtly. And in 2014, that story that you mentioned, where the dog's being mistreated by the neighbour, My Little Pyromaniac, I had written that. The Irish Times commissioned a story. But yes, the lives of animals are, it is a question of mercy for me.
Great to hear Mary Costello talking about her collection of stories, Barcelona. This year we also went out and about a bit, and one of the places we went to was the Centre of Literary and Cultural Translation at Trinity College, and thanks to Trinity for letting us use the room there. And in April, we spoke to Paul Muldoon about his new book, Joy in Service en route to Gore, published by Faber. One of the things I asked him was whether he felt poets had a particular responsibility to deal with a subject like war, for instance.
Well, I don't know if there are any requirements in the poetry business, right? I think that's the first thing I would say. I don't know if one's required to do anything. One's not required to write about blackbirds any more than one would be required to write about, war, let's say. However, as citizens of the world, I think it's inevitable that these matters press in, They are part of our, alas, of our day-to-day experience. And, in my own case, having been brought up in Northern Ireland and lived there, I left there, insofar as I left it at all, in 1986. So having lived there through the 70s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, certainly there was a sense that this was a society, still is, where things are not cut and dried, they're not determined, and where there were clearly conflicting ways of thinking about the world. So in my own poems, sometimes less directly, so that, for example, in my first book, there are a couple of poems that connect the Native American experience with the Northern Irish experience, and there are connections between them. Because actually, put very crudely, some of the methods that were used, for the extirpation of the Native Americans in many quarters were actually tried tried and tested in Ireland by various people, including the English and indeed the Scots-Irish.
And another guest at the Books for Breakfast table was publisher and poet Noel Astley. He came all the way from the north of England to talk to us about Blood Axe books. And who would have thought that a cyclone in Darwin was the reason why he first set up Blood Axe?
I was working on a newspaper in Darwin. I was a journalist before I started publishing. I'd also worked in a publishing job in London before that. And Christmas Day 1974, Cyclone Tracy completely destroyed the city of Darwin in the Northern Territory. And I was actually in my brother's house at the time. The house collapsed on top of us. We were in the bathroom and we'd managed to wedge a mattress underneath, knowing that the house would likely go, even though it was a good part of it was brick. So we used the mattress as a kind of tent to lie under. And so the rafters of the house came down over us. And we were under there for 6 hours with no idea what's going on outside because it was totally black. The radio had gone, the lights had gone, everything had gone. And we just stuck it out for that time until eventually the noise calmed down and we realised that we'd survived. And I wrote a poem about that, 2 poems about that in the first book, Darwin Survivor, about being given a second life and how everything after was a gift in a way. So that sense, I think, goes through a lot of the poems that I've chosen over the years. And then I decided to come back to England. I lost everything I had there, and I'd always had this idea I might want to get a job in publishing in London. And so I decided to go to university as a mature student and studied in Newcastle. But at the end of that period, because I was so connected with everything going on in poetry in Newcastle, I was editing Stand magazine with John Silkin for 3 years. I was the production editor of the magazine because I had that kind of experience. I was involved in Morden Tower readings, small presses, that kind of thing. And I just decided I didn't want to go to London to get a job in publishing. I wanted to actually try and set up something from scratch in Newcastle, which is how Blood Axe started when I finished university in 1978.
And on that episode, we also talked to Noel about the new Blood Axe anthology, Soul Feast. And here's Enda reading a poem by Rosemary Tonks, who features in it, and about how he came to discover her work.
Addiction to an old mattress, Rosemary Tonks. No, this is not my life, thank God. Worn out like this and crippled by brain fag. Obsessed first by one person and then, almost at once, most horribly besotted by another. These Februaries full of drafts and cracks, they belong to the people on the streets, the others out there, haberdashers, writers of menus. Salt breezes, boasters from Istanbul, barometers full of contempt, controlling, moody isobars, sumptuous tittle-tattle from a summer crowd that's fed on lemonades and matinees, and seas that float themselves about from place to place, and then spend hours just moving some clear sleets across glass stones, Yalta, deck chairs in Asia's gold cake thrones. Meanwhile, I live on, powerful, disobedient, inside their drafty haberdasher's climate with these people who are going to obsess me. Potatoes, dentists, people I hardly know. It's unforgivable, for this is not my life, but theirs that I am living, and I wolf, bolt, gulp it down day after day. What an amazing last verse, isn't it, as well? I mean, the poem just builds and builds, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's another Carpe Diem poem, isn't it? But a sort of jaded Carpe Diem, but it's still Carpe Diem, like a lot of those others that are in the book and the other book too.
And would you say a little bit about your relationship with Rosemary Tonks?
Well, I mean, she disappeared in the late 60s after publishing 2 books of poetry. No one knew where she was. I'd been wanting to republish her poems because I thought they were wonderful, those 2 books. And because I'd said something about this in print somewhere, it came to the attention of one of her family members, a cousin, who contacted me and said they were very worried about her. They didn't want to interfere with anything, but if I wanted to contact her and let her know that I would like to republish her work. And so I did write to her, didn't get any response. I asked whether I might go and visit her, and they said yes, but, do it respectfully. So we went down to Bournemouth, where she was living, where no one else knew where she was. Went to the door, she didn't answer. We knew she was in. And then I spoke to a neighbour who I then put in touch with the family so that then the family could talk to the neighbour who would tell them, oh yes, I saw her going out today to the shops and that. So they knew that she was okay. And then there was a radio programme that Brian Pratton presented on the BBC about Rosemary Tonks with various people with various theories about what had happened to her. I was the only person that knew, and I didn't let on at all because this was the agreement I had with the family. But I sent her a postcard letting her know that all these modern writers now were really interested in her work and she was much admired. And after her death, when her family let me look at her diaries, I discovered that she had actually noted the correspondence she'd had from me. And in relation to that broadcast, she said, second postcard from Satan. Was because by that stage, she had entered an area of sort of fundamentalist Christianity. She'd got to the place where she was through a mental breakdown. She'd almost gone blind. She'd completely disowned her work. She'd burned a novel that she'd written, and she completely regarded everything in her former life as anathema. But her family very much wanted her work to come to light again. So fortunately, after her death, I was able to republish her work in Bheoláin of the London Evening. But we had this one-sided correspondence. I wrote to her and I sent her books, which I'm sure she burned. I sent her Blood Axe anthologies of women poets and Staying Alive and that kind of thing. I'm sure they ended up in the incinerator. But yes, and then I was able to write the obituary on her, which appeared in The Guardian a couple of weeks after her death. And that was the first that anyone knew about what had happened to her.
Well, we're a great fan of literary journals here on Books for Breakfast. And in the summer issue of The Stinging Fly 2024, Peter Sir, sitting right beside me, translated beautiful poetry by Gormfhlaith, Shíocháin, Bheoláin.
Shíocháin Ealaíon. Má gála mís gan a bheith farad, chur is fála mar a bheith fút. Airí na gréine héad réigen na dheacha sa mlíana fós. An nurig chunug taobh a mú do neogan bhos, áileach de gairí haar scíomh na spéire, gorm seacha á dhearaga agus de seacha dú, le háins na gurta chuir le spéirú lucht na maidne, breanta de titanus, tréachta ag trécha na híthe, is canna héamh go dagan suanas in ígan anathe. A bhfuil suanas, sa tar se chorréasach sa ham chaná, an fianam bhainál le bridirnach mar valsam an nevis. Nafa se hóg na bóthir asfalt se roin, línte, bánta, behíg agus túrlingíon as bro lach na spéire, éanlathe, gemín bhráid na hawan, ciúinan sa. Tá líofacht sa hiús, agus na ceircail chroine Ealaíon os na halaí amach, stadach ní chrán an bhaidin. Agus tá leis, sa bhos a chruithin mise me líchan na hebire, a bhád ón bhód sa gan hanim, I méal chún charcaí go partaile part láirge, is cúnaile gorm glas lia gorm fé huan in a bhaidin ríist.
Restless. If I learned to lack your company, you taught me to be about you. This year, I've barely looked at the dawn. Last year, through the bus window, I saw astonishing sky, frost blue reddening and black marshy brambles in the fields adding to the brightening morning. Drops of it fallen, exhausted, wearying the night. And why is it that peace comes after a storm? Is there peace in this devouring tiredness in my bones, the pain in my neck throbbing like a balm on oblivion? Indifference took the roads before us, lines, plains, animals, and from out of the sky birds gently falling by the river quiet here. Silence speaks and fluent to the widening circles that escape from the swans. Stillness doesn't trouble the morning, and there's a cure in the bus that shakes me to work, miles from this nameless place in the mouth of Cork Bay all the way to Waterford and another port, blue, green, green, grey, grey, blue asleep, and it's morning again. And now all the way to Cavan, where Enda launched Noel Monahan's new book, Journey Upstream, published by Salmon Poetry.
At that time, I just finished the Leaving Cert. I was in St. Norbert's College, a boarder in Kilnacross, for 5 years. And when you get the Leaving Cert results, you say, what am I going to do? And there was no career guidance at that time. So I didn't want to, I was a farmer's son, but I didn't want to be a farmer. So I decided I'd be a priest instead. So I arrived at Maynooth for a brief stay there, just about a year. And there were 88 students entering in those days, you know. A lot of people. There was over 800 students, clerical students in the college. And just at that stage, they were opening the college to external students as well. So I felt I should go because after the brief stay, but I had no vocation. And they were lucky to lose me as I was lucky to go. You know, it was much like that. Maynooth was a strange place. It had its own lingo, and to cut was to leave. And it was very dramatic. The organist was a Kilmore student, and if somebody was about to cut, he seemed to know about it, and he played the Grand March from Aida, and that's where I think this piece takes off. Home I come again. It was triumphal. Verdi's Grand March from Aida, played on the organ after Vespers when a seminarian was about to cut. It never failed to move us all. Some knew who it was, others spent the evening trying to find out who is going to cut. Cut, Maynooth's terminology for abandoning ship. The trumpet voluntary gave a sense of occasion. He had fought the good fight. Every seminarian was suspect, who showed signs of crankiness, excitability, borderline insanity. I hadn't a true vocation, only thought I heard the voice of God in the thunder in Granarkill. It was never like Moses, the call from the burning bush. It's back home for me, back to the inland town, away with me now, with limited knowledge. I know something of the geography of hell, can name some of its rivers, Styx, Lethe, Tartarus. Put to sleep your dreams of ordination day, the chance of you ever becoming a bishop, an abbot. The junior dean, Bill Cos, was understanding. You want to leave? We won't stand in your way. Have you a day in mind? Wednesday, Dr. Koskov. Wednesday is good. Then Wednesday it is. You will leave quietly, no fuss. Have your people collect you outside Logic House at 7:10 a.m., while the rest are at morning meditation. Be sure to take all your belongings. God save you. Wednesday morning arrived. I waited at the door of Logic House with my suitcase and belongings. One student was permitted to wait for me and keep me company. He was all embarrassed and kept asking questions. Who's collecting you? How far is it from Maynooth to Granard? Oh, you'll be home in 2 hours. No more singing hymns to heaven for you. A blue Ford Cortina passed Rhetoric House and headed for Logic House. The headlights cut through a cold November morning. My brother Richard had arrived to take me home. I shook hands with Paddy Doherty, the student who kept me company. Thanks, Paddy. Thanks a million for waiting. Keep the faith. Goodbye now. It was a strange feeling leaving Maynooth that morning. All the clouds of doubt hadn't lifted. A feeling like the gates of paradise had slammed shut behind me. Why did you have to leave so early? My brother inquired.
Oh, lovely to hear Noel Monahan there. And this is actually our 71st episode of Books for Breakfast. Unbelievable, really. And it brings us back to our very first guest, who was Christine Dwyer Hickey. She came on the podcast when we first began it in 2020. And here she is now talking about her new novel, Our London Lives, and one of the characters, Pip, who features in this exquisite novel.
In this piece, Pip, who is a recovering alcoholic, and he is trying desperately in a way to recover. And he goes to AA meetings now and then, and he hates them because he finds it self-indulgent, and he just finds them really difficult to put up with. And he hasn't spoken at one yet. And in this particular scene, he's trying to put in time because his brother Dom and his new, as Pip finds her, insufferable girlfriend Kim are having a dinner party, and he doesn't want to be dragged into it, and he's trying to just sneak back into the house, up the stairs to the room he's staying in without them noticing him. But anyway, this happens before that, on the way home. In the small late night Sainsbury's local, he buys 2 egg and cress sandwiches, a packet of hobnobs and a carton of milk. Then he stands at the end of one of the queues. Under the brutal glare of supermarket light, he studies his fellow shoppers. Most of them middle-aged or older, all of them buying their few bits for a solo supper. Coming from work, or by the look of most, the pub. But going back anyhow to an empty room to face into the lonely weekend, maybe. The clock behind the till reads 10:30. 10:30, Christ, is that all? How long a day is without drink. For all the hardship it may cause, it does at least help to get rid of the day. And even if you don't speak to anyone, you're there under the same roof as others. You're there as an equal. For better or worse, you're part of something. Maybe that's why so many people go to AA meetings. Not because they're looking for forgiveness or a way to understand the whys and wherefores of their drinking, but simply because it's somewhere to go. A place where you'll be spoken to, looked at, listened to, where you will hear the sound of your own voice speaking and think, yes, that's me. I exist. I am alive. If he ever does stand up to speak at a meeting, instead of frightening the shite out of everyone with his tale of the burning car, he could say something simple, something honest like, I miss the pub. I miss it more than I miss the drink. I miss walking at dusk towards the light in the window, the rush of noise and heat as I push the heavy door in. I feel lost without it. Homeless, even when I have somewhere to stay. I feel like I'm dragging the hours around. My arms are too long, my hands too big. Nothing feels or looks right. I just don't fit anywhere. Unless something changes and changes quick, I'm that close to going back on the drink. He moves up the silent queue. If he had his own place, a place to come home to in the middle of the day, to cook in, to clean, to put his feet up, read a book, watch a bit of telly, somewhere to make a cup of tea in peace, a window to look out of. He shuffles up a space, only one more to go. The young bloke ahead of him, hardly more than a teenager, is holding things up, fiddling around with coins, searching in his pockets, patting them, dirty, frantic fingernails. Sorry, the cashier says, but you're 50p short. He peeps over the bloke's shoulder, a small loaf of bread and a tub of margarine. Oh, the bloke says, beginning to turn. Oh, I suppose then I best... He takes the 50p piece out of his own pocket, leans across them and places it on the counter beside the till. Thanks, mate. Oh, thanks a lot. I walked out without my wallet, see, and... He dismisses the thanks with a wave of his hand, then looks the other way as the bloke turns towards the door, the sole of one shoe flapping underfoot. Outside, 2 beggars squat on each side of the doorway like a pair of Lombardy lions. They are waiting, as he has waited himself, for a member of staff to bring out the unsold remains of the day. From the corner of his eye, he sees the old Indian woman is already in situ across the street under the canopy of the old cinema, hooked over her wheelchair, begging bag looped into the handle. The only people he has ever seen come near her are charity workers she completely ignores, or sentimental drunks who fill up her pouch. He looks up and down the road. There are few people out and about now. The restaurants have all emptied out, post-work drinkers long since gone home. He glances up at the windows above shops and offices, then at the occasional parked car or van. Someone is watching over her, he reckons, from a safe distance. Watch her well, he thinks, and then scuttles across the road. He passes into the silence of Westbourne Gardens, all in darkness. As he nears the end of this road, windows full of light begin to show. Even at night, there is an airbrushed look about these streets, every house brought to its utmost. It reminds him of the road Dom lives on, where the residents barely look you in the eye when and if they bother to say hello to you. And yet they have no trouble keeping their curtains open at night so the world and his wife can gawk in at them having their dinner. And who are these people anyway, he has to wonder, sitting in there surrounded by the props of their privileged lives, with their oversized paintings on expansive walls, their marble-topped kitchen islands. That one in there fiddling around with her elaborate coffee machine, or him next door with his refrigerated wine cabinet on display, or the house on the corner of Talbot Road where he sometimes sees a frilly cap maid open the door to the Ocado man. Just who the fuck lives like that?
Thanks so much to all the contributors, the writers, the poets who came to our breakfast table this year in 2024. We had a brilliant time.
We did indeed, and we will be back again sometime in the not too distant future with more talk, more guests.
More coffee, Peter. And also, we want to wish you all a very, very happy new year. Thanks for being such great listeners, and do tune in again in 2025 to our new Books for Breakfast.